Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So we'll do a little late night recording here that'll appear early on Monday. But I caught wind of this, so I thought I would make a quick video talking about it, especially since it's just kind of some initial information, a first impression kind of thought. I'll see if it ends up getting picked up in a few more spots, but I did see a couple of things that kind of combined and linked to it, so I thought I would discuss it a little bit because it may be something that may be worthwhile talking about more so on Friday. The main one that kind of caught my eye was basically this that was shown on Instagram, and then I went straight to the X post, if you will, that I'm looking at right here from RunGoodLife, where they're talking about WhatNot. Now, obviously, WhatNot is not exactly on a great run of PR recently, especially with the whole situation with the backyard breaks and all that. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. But it's one of those things where it's been kind of a series of body blows, self-inflicted wounds that they've put on themselves and kind of the way they run their operation in terms of communication, in terms of PR and those kinds of things. But this one specifically is kind of interesting because it's almost, it's something that if you're not really into breaking at all, it's not going to really affect you one way or the other. It's kind of what I talked about before. And as someone who does a little bit of breaking here and there, and I participate in those, it is something that could be impactful if I was using the platform. The people that I kind of do breaks with, they tend to do their breaks on YouTube. So it's one of those things where I'm not on the platform, so it's not really impacting me one way or the other. But it is interesting to me from the perspective of being almost a masterclass in like how to not operate something that requires a lot of transparency and make it a little bit worse. And you'll see where I'm going with that in a second here when I read this. So first I'll read the initial comment that led me down looking into it a little further, and then I'll show you kind of a page that I was able to pull up with a quick Google search that kind of leads me to give it a little bit of credence, and then also kind of makes me question if that's exactly the way it ends up playing out, exactly why this type of decision would be made, other than the obvious. So I'll read the initial comment and we'll get into the second part. So I'm going to start off by reading you this X post here. We'll read a couple of specific things about it, and then that's basically what led me down the rabbit hole of looking into it a little bit further. And then in the second tab, I'll show you basically an article that seems to corroborate this. And then we'll kind of take it from there in terms of some thoughts on this. First, from Run Good Life here, it says, I couldn't believe this was actually real until I read into it more. Whatnot has chosen to remove all VOD replays of sellers' past shows. If you miss your break as it happens live or want to watch it back and screenshot your hits or something, you just can't without the seller putting the VOD on a different platform. I'll come back to that in a second. This is a big insanity decision to attempt to save face and prevent viral clips of scamming that occurs on a weekly basis on the platform. Again, I'm just quoting from Run Good Life here. Instead of vetting sellers and holding them accountable, Whatnot's management has simply decided to make it more difficult for the buyers/public to hold sellers accountable. It's truly remarkable how the people in charge simply cannot do the right thing. They're really going to try to sink their platform and go bankrupt defending one breaker, aren't they? So kind of the question posed there at the end. Now, what led me, like I said, into looking into it further was this post, but then I did a little bit of digging, quick Google search, and what I came up with was this. This page is actually the Whatnot support, and I'll include a link to this in the description if you're curious. It is on the whatnot.com domain. So it's regarding Whatnot for sellers, specifically the help pages. And this is one of the articles in the help page. And as you can see from here, it's last updated here, February 19th, 2025. So still fairly recent, only a couple of days ago. And the article talks about viewing and managing videos, video on demand from previous live streams. So specifically and directly pertaining to this. So it gives a little bit of information about that video on demand, helps a seller retrieve information, allows the buyer to verify purchases they've made. So here is the key piece highlighted. When you host a live stream, you can access the full video of that live stream for up to 60 days after the live stream ends. This is from the seller's perspective. But the key part is the second sentence here. Buyers can no longer access past live streams. So this gives a little bit of credence to that first post that I was showing you. And let's quickly touch on why that would be problematic. In addition to the obvious, that it decreases transparency because suddenly it's hidden away. So let's say you did buy into a break, everything's normal, but you want to see the break because you're curious about what was pulled, and you also want to be able to take, like you said, some screenshots and things like that. That doesn't become available. That doesn't mean that the seller couldn't provide you some of that information, since they can access the VODs, which is exactly what they're talking about here, for up to 60 days. So they could do that. But in the course of doing all those other things, they may not have the inclination or be willing to. But realistically, where it becomes the problematic side of it is, again, on the heels of the backyard breaks and the fact that that viral clip was shared, which kind of led to a lot of the questions and a lot of the discussion about it. This is one of those things where if you don't happen to be watching it live or are not video capturing it and something happens, something problematic, you have no record of it. It can be a situation where a lot of people can say that something happened, or, hey, I was listening to live stream and they said this. Well, then as soon as a VOD isn't available and say the break ends or the live stream ends, then you basically don't have a record of it unless someone happened to be recording it. So that can become very problematic when there are some shiftier things that happen. It's one of those things where a lot of the bad publicity that Whatnot has received based on some breakers' bad behavior is usually followed up with a video clip showing that. So then at that point, what do you do other than, if you're somebody who really is inclined, I guess, record every live stream you see? But that's not very practical. The fact that you were able to see the video on demand, the archived, is what allowed some people to capture some of these things if they didn't happen to be watching it live in real time and were already recording. What that does above all else, just to really put it at a high level, is it decreases transparency even more in a platform that desperately needs that transparency. Like, they need it more than anybody else, because it's just not been a good run for them. And anything you do to remove and make it more difficult to catch somebody doing something inappropriate never comes off well, and it's not generally helpful. Now, I can give a kind of an old example that obviously didn't torpedo a platform. Back in the day, if any of you have been on eBay long enough, you remember that at one point we could actually see in the bid history, you could actually see the usernames of all the different bidders. So it's a situation that would allow you to very quickly identify if the same bidder was constantly bidding on same sellers things. It was an easier way to look into if somebody was shield bidding or if somebody was doing some kind of shady, nefarious things, because you could see the same username would appear on somebody else's auctions over and over again, and that would give you a little bit of an indicator. Today, you can still do an aspect of that, an element of it, but it's obviously a little bit tougher because now you have to jump through more hoops and you just don't have as much information. The idea that eBay threw out at the time was that it was kind of a privacy thing, because obviously if you had somebody's username, you could also reach out to them and talk to them about whatever auction was going on or whatever they had bought. But at the same time, realistically, what it was is it kind of decreased transparency. It made things harder to find. Well, the same thing kind of applies here. If by removing the ability to access these past live streams, you lose the ability to archive and record something, whether it be your break or somebody else's break, and you lose out on the ability to catch some of these specific things, again, if you didn't happen to be catching it at the time. Because somebody can tell you they heard this, well, you have no way of hearing that yourself. You have no way of going back and looking into it, because the only person who would have access to it would be the seller themselves in their archive. And if they did do something wrong, then obviously they're not going to provide that information. They're not going to make the video available to you that is going to make them viral for all the wrong reasons. So realistically, there's almost no scenario that actually makes this helpful for the consumer on that side of it. And it's just another kind of black mark on WhatNot's platform. And again, I'll leave it open-ended because we'll find out if more people talk about it or if more information comes up with it. But as I said, I was able to pull up at least this support documentation about it, again, with a quick Google search. But at the same time, I'd like to hear and see some more. But the problem that has been, the backyard breaks kind of showed it, is that WhatNot isn't exactly great at communicating. Which is funny, given that they had no problem providing a lot of funds for a lot of different content creators to be able to do sponsored content, which, again, I've talked about before. I have no issue with sponsored content, especially if it's correctly disclosed. But again, they have no problem getting the word out to those people through the sponsored content. But then when it comes to explaining themselves on decisions, you don't get much information unless you kind of go through channels. That's where it's kind of interesting. But nonetheless, it kind of struck out to me. The initial post that led me into looking into it a little bit further, kind of this mention here, and then finding this here that I was able to pull up. I'll include a link in the description to those two if you're curious in checking it out. There isn't too much more to it. As you can see, I pretty much read you the pertinent piece. The rest is just instructions on how to access and viewing a VOD if you're a seller, because this is an instructional help page. So really, that's all it's about. It's just giving you the step-by-step in order to do it if you're a seller on WhatNot, which is information that you're probably going to want to have. But then as a buyer, this one line, seemingly kind of a throwaway line, is kind of important, because as a buyer, that kind of leaves you with one less protection available on a platform that's already very Wild West as it is. So that'll be it for this one. I just wanted to talk through it for a couple of minutes. Hopefully I didn't go too much into circles, but you kind of get the general gist of it. I just think it's concerning that this potentially removes a little bit more transparency on something. I don't use WhatNot, so it's not going to affect me one way or the other, but it is something that obviously that other people are using, and it is something that could become very problematic on a platform that already seems to have its issues vetting a lot of the sellers and people that are participating in it. Aside from that, I'll include a link in the description to the Big Scott 35 channel, because I joined him for the live stream on Sunday where we had a little bit of fun. It's a little bit more lighthearted fare. This one was a little bit more problematic kind of a situation here, but that was more lighthearted. We had some fun, and of course I discussed the ascendancy and grail status of 1991 Fleer, which obviously, based on what I just said, tells you exactly how serious and directly pertinent to the hobby landscape that is. And it's important that you understand this. So just a little bit lighthearted fare that I think would be fun to kind of give you an offset to the first story. With that said, that's it for me for now. More videos coming up on the channel and live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There's a podcast episode that we do every week that drops on Tuesdays. And then at AMG, which I'll talk about on the podcast and other places, we do different podcasts as well that drop generally on Wednesdays. So different spots depending on what you were interested in checking out. Got a couple different places there for you. With that said, that'll be it for me for now. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.